Welcome to the Week in Review, featuring comments and commentary and the people and the issues of the day. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Joining me on my show today are Sharon Hardee Jimenez. Good to have you, media consultant. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Sherry Bebitch Jeffe, a political analyst. Did a lot with the election that just went by. Good to have you, Sherry.
Nice to be here.
And Rabbi Gary Greenbaum, who's the director of the American Jewish Committee. Always good to be with you, Larry.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. Welcome back to the Week in Review. That gentleman is so refreshing. We'll have him on again pretty soon. Again, I talked about the election. 3 out of 10 of us voted, and out of the 3 of us that voted in that, 61% of us voted for Proposition 227, which was yes to get rid of bilingual education. Joining me now is Ron Unz, who put it on the ballot. Now, listen, you're happy because you won, but there were kids who were on the street yesterday, and they weren't very happy. Why?
I think they were more confused than anything else. In fact, for example, one of the students was quoted in the paper saying that when he came here as a teenager, it took him more than 1 year to learn English. And our initiative clearly says that children who are 10 and older would have a relatively easy time getting a waiver to be placed or kept in these programs. The children we're talking about should be taught English very children. And under our initiative, that will happen.
All right, there's great resistance within the educational system. They are resisting it. There's already challenges going into the court process. When is this all going to settle and we're going to know what's going to happen?
I think it may happen a lot sooner than most people think. I think we have a very good chance of winning the battle over the preliminary injunction, which would happen in the next few weeks. And I do believe, and you can quote me on this, that the vast majority of school districts in California will be implementing our initiative at the beginning of this upcoming school year in a couple of months.
And when they implement it, what should a kid and what should a parent expect when their kid walks into the school in September?
What they should expect is a lot more English than they're getting today. Right now, many of these young children are not being given much English at all for years, and under our initiative, under normal circumstances, all these children, when they start school, generally at 5 or 6 years old, will be taught English right away, and that's better for them.
Saying that, I mean, the teachers have to be sensitized to doing that. They have to really work with that child. That's differently than they presently have to deal with. They put them all in the one class and keep the same language. How are you going to get the teachers up to snuff?
Well, we're certainly going to make every effort. In fact, we're going to try to help draft some of the guidelines or suggestions about how these school districts can implement the initiative. But remember, many of the same teachers will be implementing this policy. So in other words, if the teachers know the child's native language, if they're used to working with immigrant children who don't know English, it'll be those same teachers, except the rule now will be that unless the parents request otherwise, the children are taught English right away, and that's better for them.
Panel.
Mr. Unz, do you have any children?
No, I don't actually. I'm
You
single.
don't? Well, I have 3. I have 3 who are, their family on one side is Hispanic and their family on the other side is English-speaking Anglo. Their father was kind of thrown into schools back in the 50s where it was sink or swim all the way with English. It was really tough for him. But you know, I asked my son, who's in 11th grade, he says, what is this English initiative about? And I said, well, Yuri, you just took Spanish this last year. He said, yeah, Mom. I said, what if from now on you had to learn everything in Spanish? He says, well, I'd learn Spanish, okay, but I'd be behind everybody else. So what are you going to do when the classrooms are overcrowded? The teachers can't even deal with the kids that have learning disabilities, which 2 of mine have. How are they now going to deal with the kids that have language problems along with perhaps learning disabilities as well?
There are a lot of other problems in the school system, but one of the problems is that these young children are not being taught English. When you look at your child, for example, he was a teenager in high school, and he was being taught Spanish by being taught it 1 hour a day. That's not the way you learn another language at that age.
Question.
My question
her
is
point was that even her son who doesn't have all of these obstacles understands
that it would be very difficult for him to do that, and that the problem we have is that these kids, we're talking about falling behind, which is a huge problem in the schools right now. There's so many kids behind in reading comprehension. Why? Because the classrooms are overcrowded.
No, because of bilingual education.
Please, that's the boogeyman.
No, but
that's the boogeyman.
It is the facts of life now, though. We have passed it.
Right. If I can explain very simply, when you're talking about very young children who are 5 or 6 years old or 4 years old, they can pick up another language like English very quickly if you teach it to them. Under the current system, the vast majority of Latino children who don't know English at that age are not being taught English until the later grades, and that's the reason they don't learn it. Again, LA Unified, in their own internal study, showed that children who start kindergarten in a bilingual program, after 6 years, 2/3 of them have not learned English. That's the reason they're behind. And of all the immigrant groups that get bilingual education are the ones that do the worst in school. Now they'll be taught English. That won't solve all the educational problems, but will solve a big part of them.
Dan? So what do you want to do
Bill,
about
I think it's worth noting, and we've talked about this before, that for 11 consecutive years, bills to reform bilingual education have been introduced in the legislature, and every year they died without a peep. And if nothing else, what this initiative did is it forced for the first time the legislature to confront a very, very important issue. I guess the question I would...
The legislature to confront overcrowded schools. I think that the people voted for your initiative because they're voting to save public education. But you know what? It's going to take more than the Unz initiative to save public education.
I don't disagree with you.
It's going to take taking those classes and halving them and putting teachers in a position where they can teach, where they can engage. They can't teach and engage with the size of the classrooms we have, particularly in the LA Unified School District.
If I can respond to that, classroom sizes are much smaller now than they've ever been in the past. The 20-student class reduction is unprecedented in California history. The classes are smaller than they used to be, not larger. For the lower grades.
Just begun
and just beginning and long overdue.
For what it's worth,
and we're sitting with a surplus in Sacramento,
education experts suggest that the K through 3 grades are the grades where a lower class size can make the most difference, and that's where they've implemented this. Let me ask Ron a question, though. This is something just to go in a slightly different direction. Very early on in the campaign, I watched you talk about how you were going to go to great lengths not to make this a divisive issue and not a racial issue, and you said, I'm not going to do it like 187. If I can finish a sentence or two, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Not going to make it 187, not going to make it 209, and on and on and on. Now, you and I have disagreements about those initiatives, but inarguably, you went to great lengths to try to make this as inclusive an initiative as possible, to reach out to Hispanic and the Asian American communities. However, when the campaign came close to Election Day, the initiative was demonized by the opposition as being divisive, as being anti-Hispanic, as anti-Asian. My question is, have you learned, because of the smear campaign against it? My question to you is do you feel like you've learned a lesson? Do you feel like you've learned a lesson that this is going to be a divisive kind of issue no matter what?
Well, to respond to that, I don't know if there was really that much of a, quote, smear campaign against the initiative. And as of 2 weeks before the election, the LA Times poll showed that our lead among Latinos was 36 points. In other words, we were 36 points ahead among Latinos. Now, the exit poll showed that we lost among Latinos, but given the two polls, it's not clear whether we actually won or lost among Latinos. In fact, the exit poll numbers are, there's some mistakes in the exit polls, which we're trying to figure out.
Well, but there's also too small a sample, really, to take serious in almost any pre-election poll. So I would be very careful about the margin of error.
But if I can respond to that, there were 11 straight statewide polls, which occurred over a period of a year, all of which showed us winning the Latino vote. Now, whether we won the Latino vote or not on Election Day isn't entirely clear. But again, 2 weeks out, we were 36 points ahead, and I think clearly we did very well among Latinos. We're going to take a break real soon, unfortunately. But where do you go from here now? What will you do, Ron Unz, now that the people, 61%, have voted? Do you monitor this, follow through? What happens to you in this moment? Well, we're certainly going to try to lend some assistance, some advice to both the State Board of Education and local school districts who are trying to implement this initiative. Obviously, it's their responsibility to implement it, but we'll try to help in any way we can. And I think the most important thing was that we were able to take a program which had not worked in 30 years of effort to try to make it work, and finally been able to pull the plug on it. And I think that's a very important step forward.
With a no solution. It's a no solution initiative.
I disagree with you there.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We will find out, as Gary just said it.